I was standing in the executive lounge at Pearson Airport, sipping coffee before my flight to Paris, when the CEO's assistant texted, "Safe travels. Marcus, the whole company is proud of you. My name is Marcus Ellison. I'm 42, and until 3 days ago, I was the director of international market expansion at Maplecore Consulting, a firm I helped grow from a mid-tier Toronto agency into a recognized player across Europe. At least, that's how I used to introduce myself. They weren't proud of me. Not anymore. Not in any way that felt real. I could see it in their eyes. The way conversations ended just a beat too soon. Or how my ideas were now interesting instead of necessary. For a long time, I had been the golden boy, the guy who built the European client base from scratch, who flew to Frankfurt and Lyon when no one else would. But lately, that spotlight had shifted, and I wasn't the one standing in it. I opened the Nexora Labs file one last time. Everything was ready. The decks, the projections, the custom roadmap. If today's meeting went well, we'd secure a 3-year extension worth $12 million. Nexora was our crown jewel in Europe and a client I'd personally landed 4 years earlier. I had earned this trip. That was what made it feel strange. When I joined Maplecore 8 years ago, our international strategy was nothing more than a footnote. Derek Hollingsworth, then vice president of strategy, told me outright, "Europe isn't a priority." I took that as a challenge. I built the relationships myself, funded the first client meetings out of my own pocket, and spent weekends buried in cross-border compliance regulations. Within 5 years, I had grown our European portfolio to account for over BA fan num of Maplecore's global revenue. It should have meant security, but instead, the past few months had felt off. 3 weeks ago, I was removed from a strategic planning meeting without explanation. Derek said it was just capacity management. 2 weeks ago, I found that my dashboard access to client revenue data had been restricted. IT update. They said, last Friday, I was left off the distribution list for our internal quarterly memo. A minor thing, but not to me. Even Derek's tone had shifted. Once a mentor, now he barely made eye contact. The day before my flight, he passed me in the corridor, phone in hand, no nod, no small talk. Just a tight-lipped safe travels as he walked by like I was already gone. I carried those moments with me into the lounge that morning. They buzzed in my chest like static I couldn't shake. Still, I told myself this trip was about success, about growth. I had built something that couldn't be erased with silence. My flight boarded on time. I tucked my badge into my coat and found my seat 3A, business class. The woman next to me glanced over as I settled in. "Paris for work?" she asked. I nodded. "Big renewal meeting," I said. "One of our major clients." She smiled. "Must be nice to have that kind of trust." I looked out the window, unsure how to respond. Derek used to say that at a town hall 3 years ago, he stood on stage and pointed at me. "If there's anyone I trust to represent Maplecore internationally," he said, "it's Marcus Ellison." I held on to those words for years. I let them define me. Maybe that was the mistake. The flight attendant offered champagne. I declined. My phone buzzed again with another good luck text from the client-side liaison. Everyone was expecting great things from this trip. I didn't know it then. But the Paris trip wasn't a reward. It was an exit strategy. Paris welcomed me with champagne and compliments. But something about the hotel reservation felt off. The check-in clerk smiled, cheerful and efficient, then paused mid-keystroke. "Pardon, Monsieur Ellison, your reservation appears to be under a different name. Trevor Hollingsworth." Trevor. The name struck like cold water to the chest. I forced a polite smile. "I'm sure it's just a mix-up. Can you please switch it back to mine?" She nodded, but my mind was already spinning. Trevor was Derek's nephew. He'd joined Maplecore just 2 months earlier. No international experience. Barely out of grad school, and certainly not someone with any business being attached to Nexora's account. I hadn't even met him in person. Now his name was tied to my client's itinerary. After settling into the room, I opened my laptop and logged into our client portal. My credentials worked, but the access was different. The Nexora files, once a central part of my workflow, had been moved to a shared oversight folder. Trevor's name was listed as co-owner. I stared at the screen, heart slowing with every second. This wasn't just a miscommunication. The meeting the next morning went smoothly on the surface. I presented our updated digital integration model, customized for Nexora's scaling goals in the French and German markets. They responded well, polite nods, firm handshakes. And one executive even joked, "We trust you more than our internal teams." But when the lead procurement officer mentioned a confirmation call last week with a Maple Core colleague, I froze for just a beat. I hadn't scheduled any call, and no one had told me when happened. "Do you remember who they spoke with?" I asked lightly. She looked at her notes. "Trevor Hollingsworth." "I believe." I kept smiling. I nodded. But inside, everything tilted sideways. Later that afternoon, I found a quiet cafe across from the Eiffel Tower. I ordered a flat white and pulled out my phone. My fingers hovered over the screen. Hesitant to search for answers I wasn't sure I wanted. I opened my inbox, dozens of new emails, mostly internal updates and forwarded notes. But one subject line caught my eye. Client Access Review, Germany, France, Benelux. I clicked it. It was from our IT operations manager. The email discussed new account-level access protocols, noting that several senior leaders had been reclassified as regional contributors rather than strategic owners. My name was on that list. It was dated 2 weeks ago. I hadn't been informed. No one had consulted me. Just then, a new message popped up from Amelia Ross. Subject: confidential, will you speak when back in Toronto? Body: Marcus, we need to talk. There have been some structural changes I think you're not aware of. Please don't delete this. Call me when you're back. Amelia was our director of human resources. Level-headed. Careful, she didn't send emails like this unless something was seriously wrong. I opened our internal chat system to look at the team hierarchy tree. Trevor was now listed as Associate Director, Europe Client Relations. That title didn't exist last week. Back in the hotel room, I scrolled through my sent folder. An email I'd written to Klaus Neumann at Holberg Pharmaceuticals last Monday was marked read, but not by Klaus. I traced the routing data. It had been automatically forwarded to Derek's private subdomain. There was a rule set up on the server, one I hadn't approved or even known existed. They were reading my messages, watching my activity, managing my accounts behind my back. If Trevor was calling clients and Derek was monitoring my communication, this wasn't just politics, it was betrayal. And it was coordinated. The lights from the Eiffel Tower flickered outside my window, and for the first time since landing, I didn't feel like a visiting executive. I felt like a target, isolated, cornered, and quietly removed from everything I'd worked to build. I needed to think. I needed leverage. And most of all, I needed to talk to someone who didn't think I was crazy. If they were reading my emails, this wasn't just politics. It was betrayal. Rafael Nadal had just lined up for match point at Roland Garros when my phone buzzed with a single sentence that ended my career. I never saw the ball land. I only saw the text, "You're fired. Clear out your desk by Monday." For a second, the noise of the stadium faded, like someone had turned down the volume on the world. The sun was brilliant overhead, bouncing off the clay, the crowd rising to its feet in unison, but I couldn't hear them. All I could hear was the blood pulsing in my ears. I stared at the screen. No call, no meeting, no conversation, just 2 lines of text, no subject line, no signature. Another message arrived almost immediately. Do not return to HQ before contacting HR. You will be mailed your exit package. My thumb hovered over the screen. Then, slowly, I locked the phone and placed it face down in my lap. I didn't panic. I didn't swear. I didn't even move. What I felt wasn't rage. It was something colder, sharper, like steel sliding into place. They had waited until I was thousands of kilometers from the office, isolated, without access to internal systems or my team. They wanted this to be clean, quick, unquestioned. They had even timed it to match point, an elegant little metaphor for game over. What they didn't know was that the game had just changed. I looked to my left. Seated beside me was a man in his late 50s, sharp navy suit, silver hair, a calm face with the kind of practiced stillness you only learn from decades in boardrooms. He'd barely reacted to the roar of the stadium. He was watching me. "Everything all right?" he asked, voice low, distinctly Quebecois with a touch of European polish. I knew that face. Gérard Leclerc, Chief Executive Officer of Orion Partners, Maple Core's most direct competitor in the Canadian and European consulting space. We met once at a conference in Montreal, briefly, enough for him to remember my name. Perhaps I remembered his "just work," I said, and offered a tight smile. but my mind had already started racing. What was he doing here? Better question, what if he was exactly where he needed to be? The client relationships I'd built weren't just revenue streams, they were trust-based partnerships. Nexora's CEO had specifically asked me to remain their point of contact through the entire contract. Clara Neumann in Berlin had told me 2 months ago that she would not renew without continuity and oversight. Marie Dubois had said she felt like I was the only person who understood both the culture and the tech. These weren't just accounts. They were people, and Derek clearly believed he could fire me, slide his nephew into my role, and nothing would change. I reached down, unlocked my phone again, and reread the messages. You're fired. Do not return. The words weren't just cruel, they were arrogant. Gérard was still watching the court, but his body was angled slightly toward me now. He'd noticed the tension, the silence, the way I hadn't celebrated Nadal's win. I leaned in slightly. Mr. Leclerc, I said. He turned to me, raising a curious eyebrow. I'm Marcus Ellison, I said, extending my hand, formerly of Maplecore Consulting. He shook it, his grip firm. Gérard Leclerc, though I suspect formerly is about to become a very important word. I turned the phone toward him and showed him the messages. He read them silently, twice. Then his mouth curled into the faintest hint of a smile. Well, he said, this is very fortunate timing. He tucked away his phone and buttoned his jacket as the crowd began to disperse. Would you be interested in continuing this conversation over dinner? He asked. I know a place near the Seine. Quiet, private, excellent wine list. I nodded once. I extended my hand. Marcus Ellison, formerly of Maplecore. Maybe not for long. I didn't yell. I didn't reply to the text. I simply smiled, stood up, and asked Gérard if he liked seafood. He gave a short, knowing nod. You're not the first man to be betrayed mid-contract, he said as we exited the stadium, but you might be the most dangerous one. We walked in silence through the late afternoon crowds along the Seine. My mind was no longer on revenge, not exactly. It was on leverage, control. The next move, the restaurant Gérard chose was tucked inside a narrow cobblestone alley, dimly lit, and hushed, the kind of place only locals knew. We were seated in a private corner booth within minutes. The waiter greeted Gérard by name. He ordered for both of us in fluent French, grilled turbot, steamed mussels, 1 bottle of Chablis. He didn't ask. I appreciated that. Once our menus were taken away, Gérard steepled his fingers and looked at me with the sharpness of a man who never wasted words. Let me guess, he said. You built their international division, and now they think they can cut you out and keep the clients. I nodded. They sent the termination while I was in Paris. Derek didn't even have the spine to call, and the nephew, Trevor Hollingsworth, fresh MBA, doesn't speak French or German, had his name on my hotel booking. Gérard winced. That's not just insulting. That's amateur. I told him everything. About the restricted access, the forwarded emails, the call from Amelia Ross, our HR director, the phantom job title. I didn't dress it up. I didn't need to. When I finished, he took a long sip of wine, then leaned back. Tell me, Marcus, what do you want? That was the moment I stopped being a victim. I hadn't answered Derek's messages. I hadn't called Maplecore's legal department. I hadn't panicked. Because deep down, I knew the real currency in this business wasn't position. It was relationships, and those were still mine. I want to keep my clients, I said, and I want a platform that knows how to protect value instead of exploit it. Gérard smiled. Then we're already negotiating. We spent the next 40 minutes outlining possibilities. Orion Partners had been trying to expand into the Canadian market for years, but lacked the right network. I had that network and the experience to move fast. Gérard offered me autonomy over the North American expansion, a 30-fan increase in salary, and equity, real equity, not the vague promises Derek had dangled for years. After dinner, I returned to the hotel, slipped off my shoes, and opened my laptop. My contact list stared back at me. Nexora Labs, Holberg Pharmaceuticals, Hollowgate Systems, names I knew better than most people knew their own family. I started with Nexora, sent a brief, respectful message. I'll be transitioning from Maplecore shortly. Would love to connect next week to discuss continued collaboration. I believe continuity matters to both of us. Then I messaged Clara Neumann, then Marie Dubois. By midnight, I had 6 conversations in motion, every one of them tied to accounts that made up nearly Motui, Fan, Batong doan thu cho ka maple core. I didn't pitch Orion yet. That would come later. For now, I was planting seeds calmly, carefully, and fully within legal bounds. The next morning, I received 3 replies, all positive, all asking when we could meet. Later that day, Gérard sent me a draft contract. Position, Director of Strategic Expansion, North America. Terms, full autonomy, profit sharing, no non-compete conflicts, start date, open pending client migration. He ended the message with a single line, let me know when you're ready to light the match. I left the restaurant with a contract draft in my inbox. All I had to do now was take it home and light the match. Back in Toronto by Sunday. I walked into my old office for the last time. Nobody knew I'd already burned the bridge on their side. I'd flown in overnight. No announcement. No dramatic return. I walked straight past the front desk with my access card still active, a detail I found almost amusing. Derek's house of mirrors was thorough, but not infallible. The office felt colder than I remembered. Maybe it was the lighting, maybe it was me. I headed straight for my office, picked up a few framed photos, a mug I'd bought in Munich, and a folder of handwritten notes that I never trusted to digital storage. Everything else could rot in a drawer. There was nothing personal left in that place, not anymore. The meeting with HR was scheduled for 9 geo saying. The conference room was already set. Derek sat at the head of the table, wearing his usual polished suit and his usual politician smile. Trevor, the young heir apparent, leaned back in my old chair, spinning a pen like he'd already won something. Amelia Ross, our HR director, looked tired. Her eyes flicked to me. Unreadable. Marcus, Derek said with artificial warmth. How was Paris? Educational, I said, and took a seat. Amelia slid a manila folder across the table. This contains your severance agreement, NDA terms, and the standard non-compete clause. Nothing unusual. I flipped through the pages without reacting. It was all as expected, legally clean, strategically obvious. The non-compete clause only applied within the Greater Toronto Area. Conveniently irrelevant. We've decided to consolidate international operations under Trevor's oversight. Derek continued. It's a leaner model, more agile. He said agile like it meant something. I looked at Trevor. He smirked. You laid great groundwork. I'll build on it. There was a long pause. Derek seemed almost disappointed I wasn't angry. I think he wanted to see something to justify what he'd done. Instead, I stood up, shook his hand, and said, I wish you the best with the European market. I could see him mentally bookmarking the moment. The last time Marcus Ellison walked out the door quiet, cooperative, no drama, just how he wanted it. Except he didn't know that by then, I'd already signed a preliminary agreement with Orion Partners, and I wasn't leaving empty-handed. I was walking out with every intangible they had forgotten how to value. Trust, loyalty, memory, and leverage. In the hallway, I passed by Trevor again. He had taken my old chair, my old desk. He was laughing loudly with 2 junior analysts, trying too hard to look like he belonged. I kept walking. That evening, I received another message from Amelia. This time, it wasn't about policy. Can we speak privately? We met at a quiet cafe on Bloor Street. Amelia showed up with a folder and a troubled expression. I reviewed Trevor's hiring paperwork. She said his employment was backdated 3 months, but he only started 2 weeks ago. His salary is higher than yours ever was. I stayed silent. There's more, she continued. Derek set up a forwarding rule on your inbox. He's been reading your client messages for at least 6 weeks. I only found it by accident while investigating a separate access issue. What was the reason given internally for my departure? I asked. She hesitated. He told the board you were planning to leave, that you'd been disengaging for months. That was the moment everything locked into place. The client call rewrites, the calendar removals, the cold hallway nods. It had never been about strategy. It was about rewriting the story before I had a chance to finish it myself. He's trying to make me look disloyal, I said quietly. Amelia nodded. I think he's prepping the European unit for sale. There's chatter about a German consulting firm. He's telling them you were unstable, inconsistent, that the client stayed because of Maple Core, not you. I finished my coffee. What else did you find? There's a preliminary agreement already signed. Sale scheduled for next month. He was cutting me out, cashing in on my work, and planting his nephew as a placeholder. The whole Paris trip had been a decoy. A polite exile, orchestrated to look like an honor. I asked her one thing. Would you be willing to testify to that under oath? By Friday morning, 3 major clients had sent termination notices. By Monday, the German acquisition team walked away. I watched it unfold from the corner office of Orion Partners' Vancouver branch, sunlight spilling across the desk. It was surreal, like watching a slow-motion collapse from the safety of higher ground. Gérard Leclerc had just stepped out of a call when he turned to me and said, "Maplecore's board is demanding answers." Apparently, no one saw this coming. Of course they didn't. Derek had been so obsessed with controlling the story that he forgot the most important part of any narrative: who the audience trusts. I spent the rest of that week doing what I'd always done best: listening, calling clients, understanding their pain points, reassuring them, not selling, just showing up. Nexora Labs officially transferred their contract by Thursday. Holberg followed on Friday. By end of month, 6 former Maplecore clients had legally and willingly shifted to Orion with zero legal interference. They chose me, not a company, not a logo. Me! Back in Toronto, the silence was breaking. Trevor resigned after a disastrous client call in which he confused 2 countries' compliance policies and mispronounced Liechtenstein twice. Amelia told me that Patricia Wells, one of the senior operations directors, had started asking questions Derek couldn't answer without unraveling the very narrative he'd so carefully built. Then came the final blow. On the following Monday, Gérard walked into my office holding a printed email. "Maplecore's German buyer is backing out," he said. "Without the client list, there's no value left in the European division." And Derek, I asked, fired, unanimous vote. The board cited misconduct and critical oversight failure. Gérard paused, then added, "Congratulations. You managed to take apart an empire without raising your voice." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded. A day later, I received a call from Patricia. She spoke slowly, deliberately, as if weighing every word. "I know what you did. I also know what he did. Are you calling to accuse me of something?" I asked. "No," she said. "I'm calling to ask if you're hiring." We brought her in the following quarter. She now runs European operations at Orion. She brought 2 of her former Maplecore team with her. Amelia joined a month after that. By summer, the once dominant European wing of Maplecore had become little more than a nameplate and a skeleton crew. Meanwhile, Orion opened new offices in Boston and expanded across Scandinavia. Our projected annual revenue doubled within 6 months. The Norwegian pharmaceutical contract, once assumed dead, not only revived but grew into a regional partnership spanning 5 countries. It was never about revenge. Not really. It was about restoration, taking back what mattered. Derek had always thought I was too quiet, too measured. He used to call me calm to a fault. What he never understood was that silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's strategy. Gérard said it best one afternoon in our Vancouver boardroom. "He called you pathetic," he said. Now he's the one packing up his office with no one to say goodbye. I didn't respond. I just opened the next client file. There was work to do. There's something haunting about being betrayed by the very people who once praised you. I've felt that sting, the silence in the hallway, the sudden exclusions, the cold professionalism that masks a knife in the back. But I've also learned that patience, clarity, and a well-timed move can rewrite everything. This story isn't just mine. It echoes in offices, boardrooms, and quiet resignation emails around the world. And if you're watching this while wondering if you're the only one, you're not. Sometimes the most powerful response isn't revenge. It's choosing not to break. It's protecting your integrity while watching others undo themselves. So thank you truly for listening to this journey. If it resonated with you, leave a 1 in the comments so we know you're with us. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this of quiet resilience, strategy, and justice done right. And if you've been through something like this or are going through it now, your story matters. Share it if you're ready. We're here.